It's been 14 years since we last saw The Sopranos on TV screens, but prequel film The Many Saints of Newark is here to satiate our appetites for mobster drama. It soars when it focuses on the iconic characters of HBO's acclaimed series, getting the mafia aspects right, and only falters when it tries to add too much to the Sopranos universe in its limited 2-hour time frame. Still, this should satisfy fans who've been missing or re-watching the beloved show over the past decade and a half.
Pain comes from always wanting things. But what do I know? I'm a murderer.
Although this is, in part, Tony Soprano's origin story, the film largely centers on the man Tony idolized growing up, Dickie Moltisanti, during the late 1960s to the mid-1970s. Fans of the series will recognize that name as he's the father of Tony's ill-fated right-hand man Christopher, who also serves as our narrator from Beyond the Grave. Tony's mostly an observer. Dickie is the really interesting sell here, and we learn that he served as Tony's main influence into the mafia world. The two have a lot in common aside from just their violent tempers. Dickie, like Tony, believes he's the hero in his own story and justifies his terrible actions by trying to do some good. You know, despite the murders and money laundering. The only problem is that we're given just 2 hours to get to know this character versus the 86 episodes we spent with Tony. Even with the inclusion of a voice of reason in Dickie's incarcerated uncle, played wonderfully by Ray Liotta, it never feels like Dickie could wipe the red in his ledger clean. Alessandro Nivola is fantastic as the tormented character, playing this morality push and pull beautifully and convincingly. Meanwhile, in a much buzzed about casting, Michael Gandolfini steps into the shoes of Tony, the role his late father, James Gandolfini, made iconic. He does a great job playing the younger version of this famous character, looking and sounding a lot like the Tony Soprano we'll eventually meet. Vera Farmiga also stands out as Tony's mother, Livia, and reflects the utter chaos that we saw in her in the original series. The Sopranos creator David Chase and co-writer Lawrence Konner, who returned for the prequel, obviously have an intimate understanding of Italian mobster stories, and the film is at its best when it comes to the family aspect of mafia life. It's when The Many Saints of Newark attempts to expand the mobster universe to include other rival gangs that it starts to feel disjointed. It's clear that Harold, Dickie's muscle and enforcer, played by Leslie Odom Jr., is tired of the Italians taking over the city, including the black neighborhoods, and wants to take control by any means necessary. Adding to the racial tension are the 1967 Newark riots happening in the backdrop. It's obvious that this narrative is important to Harold's actions and motivations, but the film doesn't really follow up on it. This aspect of the plot really just ends up feeling empty. Harold, too, is mostly sidelined in the third act, never giving us a proper resolution for his and Dickie's strained relationship. The movie's biggest obstacle is really its lack of time. It makes sense that it focuses more on Tony in the third act. After all, we want to know how Dickie's story connects to the eventual Don. But as interesting as it is to explore Tony's youth, it's to the detriment of Dickie and Harold's stories. The Sopranos thrived by creating nuanced and flawed characters with rich storylines and brilliant performances. The Many Saints of Newark has all the elements to be just as good, but falls flat when it tries to add too many layers to the story with such limited time. If HBO Max decides to take this up a notch and greenlights a limited series, it has the potential to be great.
When I was a kid, guys like me were brought up to follow codes.
The Many Saints of Newark gets the Italian mafia drama right, with Dickie Moltisanti's narrative at the forefront, led by a superb performance by Alessandro Nivola. The film shines when it has its iconic characters going through morally complex personal and professional issues, but occasionally tries to stuff in too many new storylines in only 2 hours. Still, it has many of the ingredients of what made the original great and should leave nostalgic fans satisfied. For more, check out our reviews of Halloween Kills and Dune, and for everything else, stick with IGN.
As far as your nephew goes,
I'm listening.
stay out of his life.